Hello, this is Jeffrey Fox again. We're discussing big data, open source software and projects, the course offered this semester. And now we're going through actual applications from the 51 use cases, um, describing them in a little more detail to possibly to illustrate the structural characteristics we've identified. This is the second lesson in this unit. And if you remember the previous lesson, we introduced it and then went through some image applications. Here we're going through some more image-based applications. And that's what it says here. Applications. We actually gave you the list, and we're just going through the last part of that list in this lesson. So the first one we come to is Catalina, which is sort of a prototype of a very important type of astronomical application, which will actually get even more important with future devices implemented in the next 10 years. So this is a survey which explores the whole universe, and it's the way it does that is to take obviously images. That's why it's in this section, and it then looks for interesting things. So sources that change with time, and either just in terms of the intensity or come and go. And it studies all sorts of things: supernova, variable star, black holes, and all sorts of nifty things. And there are 3 telescopes in this particular survey, and there are additional ones coming along. And it says on a clear night, it's not huge amounts of data, just 1/10 of a terabyte. And they currently have around 100 terabytes. And remember I discussed that there's a critical issue when you where you do the processing, whether you do it actually at the site or whether you do it at the back end. Now, telescopes are not in the forefront of a battle, so it's more realistic to put significant processing actually at the telescope. So to plan to do processing at the telescope is very reasonable. And then after that, you transfer it back to back-end computers. For Catalina, that's at Arizona and Caltech. This is streaming data. It's done in real time because there are many actual things you will follow up on. And they better follow up while the event is still interesting, not when it's disappeared. And there's an interesting comment about intellectual property here, namely this particular survey gets out the events immediately without any holding time, so that the people who made the discovery can exploit it first. So that's what it's sort of actually not so common. And then we do further data analysis, which obviously puts it into catalogs of particular types of nifty objects, and then you send it off to other specialized telescopes, larger ones and things like that, and you have clever people interpret it. And in doing this is actually like a lot of science, like in case of biology, you take your gene sequence and compare it with the world's collection of previous sequences. Here we've got our astronomical scene, and we're going to compare it with all previous astronomical scenes. And the virtual observatory is this geographically distributed collection of existing astronomy data. So here is a picture of the actual processing. And it's, as I pointed out, that there is this famous Large Synoptic Survey telescope, which will gather about 30 terabytes a night. That's 300 times more than the CRTS. And that's meant to operate in the mid-2020s. And it was voted on as the most important astronomical instrument to build in the 2010 community activity. Astronomy is well known for having a very powerful community activity to decide which machines to build. So here we have the actual data being observed here. It passes through a sort of processing engine, and it gets classified. Remember how much often in big data we do classification. Here we obviously were classifying it to see what is most likely to be a meteor, a supernova, an asteroid about to crash on the Earth, and what have you. And then you go and do whatever follow-up activities might be useful. The next use case 35 is the light source beamlines. This is, science has got a lot of instruments, core instruments. The Large Hadron Collider at CERN will come to a bit later on in this unit, not in this lesson. But of course, telescopes are one as our instruments which give images, and light sources are other ones. And X-rays are, of course, just photons of a particular wavelength. And by bombarding biology or material science samples with photons, you gain all sorts of useful information. And you record that information typically by taking photographs or images of what actually happened. And then you have to do a lot of you run a lot of image processing software. ImageJ is a well-known Java library for image processing. And then you need to, typically this will be done on a back-end machine using some variant of file transfer to transport the data from the light source, which is typically a circular accelerator, to the back-end computer. And as I pointed out, Moore's laws implying camera resolutions are getting better and better and better every time. And you have 39 at the Berkeley Advanced Light Source beamlines. I mean, as these electrons whip around this circle, they spew off light continuously, and you just sample it 39 times, and you can do 39 simultaneous experiments, pointing out the amount of data we have is quite a lot. So this is a classic example of a scientific instrument which is getting more and more data because A, you have new instruments, and B, the actual detectors are getting more and more advanced and finer resolution, getting more data. Here we have use case 43, which is one I'm associated with, radar data analysis of ice sheets. This is aimed at trying to feed into scientific understanding of ice sheets. That scientific understanding goes into climate change studies, because the melting and other changes of the polar regions is very important in climate change. And you take radars whose wavelength and characteristics are adjusted to whatever you're trying to do. Sometimes you probe short distances, which are the layers of snow. Those are very short. Or you do it, you're actually going kilometers deep when you're looking at the actual depth of an ice sheet. I should note that this field, like many engineering fields, so radar as an engineering field uses MATLAB, and the MATLAB is signal processing is actually, this is done usually on the field at the time the data is taken, and the initial processing, that data is actually written to disk, and you do analyze some of the disk in the field to check the apparatus is working, but the rest is flown. The removable disks are placed in aircraft and flown home. And everything is visualized with the GIS, because this is a classic Earth data. And you feed these ice sheet depths into simulations of glacier flow, which will then help to tell you, as you integrate that over all known glaciers, what the total impact of the rising temperatures are. And this is, I mentioned that in science you often have batching of the data gathering. Here you gather up to maybe 100 terabytes. That's growing that amount of data per expedition, which might be a month or two sitting in sight with a particular aircraft, a particular vehicle, in a particular location, and on the polar regions. The same type of work can actually also be done in Himalayas and Chilean mountains, because those also have glaciers which are subject to climate change. Here are some examples of pretty nifty structure here, which shows the actual glacier bed here, and some rather probably fake activity here, which is just reflects false signals coming from this basic thing at the bottom. But the thing at the bottom is pretty clear, so you can actually see 3 kilometers down from our little aircraft up here at half a kilometer above the surface of the glacier. Here is the use of GIS. Like typically when you have your basic map, and then you can click on the map and get more detail. These particular things here map the paths of the aircraft, which in this case here are either DC-8 or Twin Otter, and these creases, the NSF organization I work with, used the Twin Otter, and NASA has done similar. We work with NASA, who also use the DC-8. Each time these aircraft are fitted with radar, which radar is downward facing to observe the ice sheet. And here we're just seeing the paths, so you can then plan what other paths you should take to be able to really understand what's going on. Here in more detail is one of these images I showed you. Here's this 1 to 3 kilometer depth of the actual glacier. It's sort of pretty striking how much it varies. It's by no means flat, the bottom of the glacier. If you did your model of a glacier with a flat bottom, you wouldn't get the right answer. Here's the here's the top of the glacier, here's the bottom of the glacier. And you use image processing or human beings to identify these two discontinuities from the images, and that then gets fed into the simulations, as I've explained. Here's another example of radar, which is synthetic aperture radar, which is meant to examine changes this is not going too deep, it's looking at the surface of the Earth, and it's looking at, say, position changes due to seismic activity, landslides, cutting down the forests, etc. And it's particularly useful for earthquake science, because these changes in positions can be a harbinger or a consequence of earthquakes. And for this particular piece of science, you have to again store the data. Remember, we discussed that a bit under pathology. You have to take all your data, spatial data, and store it in a way you can recover it, so you can actually search by region. You need to do image processing on the image, and you need to visualize it in some variant of a GIS system. And this data either comes from satellites or planes. And there's lots of communication, of course, between the plane and the satellite and where it's processed. And there's again there's I think a pretty rapidly increasing amount of data, but again, it's not measured in many petabytes. At the moment, it's a fraction of a petabyte. This work is typically not done on clouds largely, but clouds certainly a very suitable place to do this. And I expect the analysis to shift to clouds in the future as more data comes along. Here's an example where the movement of the Earth, positioning movement, is shown visually by the color coding, showing the striking position variation, spatial variation of local position changes, and these can allow you to tell you where the slip was, which is where the fault was, or where the actual Earth moved most rapidly, and that of course allows you to understand more deeply the earthquakes that are going on. And here are GPS stations, which you feed into summers, which are also used in this analysis. You have data from satellites and data from actual fixed Earth-located GPS stations. So that was the last of the image-based applications and the end of this lesson. Now we're going to go on to the Internet of Things-based applications, which will be a single lesson, which is part C of this unit. Thank you very much. This is Jeffrey Fox signing out. Thank you.